Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. I'm excited to have my friend, the State Attorney General from Missouri, Eric Schmitt, join us today. How are you, Eric?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for taking the time today. We're going to talk about a lot of interesting topics, many you're on the front lines of, and I just think so much of it has, because of this Biden administration, has been pushed to the states to try to enforce these laws. I mean, generally, before we get into sort of Title 42 and so many other things, what's your experience right now with the federal government in trying to get them to do their job really across the board?
I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I think what you're seeing that the administrative state has been supercharged by this administration. I mean, they don't want to go try to convince anybody of anything. They want to manipulate these agencies to move an agenda that's pretty radical. I mean, the best example of that, and we can talk about it in more depth, was the OSHA mandate, right? This was an agency that was created to make sure forklifts beep when they back up, not force a medical procedure on 100 million Americans. And that's what they were trying to do. And I think in their haste, honestly, to undo all of the successes of President Trump and his administration, on day one, they signed all these executive orders, whether it was related to border security or energy independence, and the consequences have been disastrous. And so, as you know, the states created the federal government to be a government of limited powers, and it's up to the states now to push back. And of course, that design by the founders was genius, because they knew that if you spread out power through checks and balances, separation of powers, federalism, you would prevent any one branch or agency or person from ever becoming too powerful to protect individual liberty. And that's never been more on the line than it is right now, which is why, here in Missouri, we've taken the lead on a lot of these lawsuits.
Yeah, and how quickly we forget. When I sent you the list of things I wanted to talk about, I had just the OSHA mandate, obviously was another area where you fought so hard and were successful. What do you take the learning from that case and then apply it to the next case, or is each one of these a creative extension by the Biden administration to try to go beyond the law as it's written to make it what they want it to be?
Yeah, I think that's the general principle that applies in most of these cases, and that they're trying to fit an elephant in a mouse hole, right? And that's kind of what the argument was with those vaccine mandate cases, and we were successful. And the practical implications of that. Missouri was the first state to file, and one of the plaintiffs with our state was a manufacturer of trailers that you'll have on the back of a landscaping truck in mid-Missouri. They had 160 employees. They got supply chain issues as it is. They're long on tires because they don't know if they're going to run out of those. They're short on some of the smaller equipment that they need to finish it. If they run out of either one, they're out of business. Yep. They knew that there were just a certain number of people that were part of the workforce that had decided they weren't going to get vaccinated, right? They were making their own decision. They were going to be out of business, like literally out of business. Right. And so in addition to the legal issues of them not having the authority to do it, it would have just exacerbated our supply chain issues. The same with the trucking industry. And so those general principles about trying to move an agenda without actually having the Article 1 branch Congress ever say yes to something is a recurring theme. Now, you'll also see, I think, this is a playbook that they're going to use over and over. You notice they're not calling it climate change anymore. They're calling it a climate emergency. This is all meant to kind of empower the EPA or transportation to move this radical Green New Deal administratively without people ever having to vote on it. So we filed lawsuits as it relates to the social cost of greenhouse gases rule that they've got out there, certainly on the Keystone XL pipeline, on the federal, the leasing on federal lands. I mean, we've been in the mix on all these, and this is a core issue, right? The energy independence. President Trump brought us energy dominance, and we can export that to our friends and allies across the globe. So the fronts are, one of the things you learn as an AG is that there are so many fronts to fight on. You see the full landscape of how the left is trying to fundamentally change this country, and we're not having, I've said this, on the Senate campaign trail too, that we're not having traditional political debates in this country anymore about tax rates and entitlement reform. The left is a couple of votes away from adding states to the union, packing the Supreme Court, federalizing our elections, fundamentally changing this country forever. They're playing for keeps, and so I think it's important to fight back.
No, you're absolutely right, and it is their agenda, like you said, with just a few votes, would be so radical, so transformative, and almost impossible to recover from. And I can't tell you how much, sort of everywhere I go in the country, and oftentimes I'm running into you, whether it's down at the border on the Rio Grande River or other places, but you've just been so active in making sure that this administration can't implement this radical agenda. But you're right, there are so many fronts with which they're attempting to expand government without any kind of political mandate or political power to implement this. But I think they believe, and they probably know, they see what you see as you're talking to ordinary people in places in Missouri that most have never heard of. Whether it's Cape Girardeau or Joplin or so Kirksville, where my mom went to college, all those places.
That's where I went. That's where I went to undergrad. I think I told you that. Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
And
it feels the weather in Kirksville is a lot like Iowa, Matt. It's just really, it's cold and windy.
Well, I don't admit this often, but my mom and dad are from Keokuk, Iowa, which is about as close to Missouri as you can get without actually being in Missouri. But anyway, that's why I'm a Cardinals fan too. So
I love it. Yes.
But I'm sure that you see that the American people don't want this big city agenda. They don't want rising crime rates. And unfortunately, in Missouri, you kind of have a tale of two Americas, which is you have St. Louis and Kansas City, which have seen the violent crime spikes, that have suffered from these city officials that don't want to put bad guys in jail, that want to release them on bond and let them back into the community, and keep your fingers crossed that they don't reoffend or commit another crime and hurt more people. But you also see like small towns where these employers that you mentioned are affected by the mandates from Washington D.C. and they didn't vote for it. They don't want it. And so how talk a little bit about, as you get around the country, we'll come back to some of the stuff on my list like mask mandates and Title 42 litigation, but since you mentioned it, talk about what ordinary citizens, our fellow citizens, your fellow citizens in Missouri, what's on their mind? What do they care about? What do they hope that they start seeing from Washington D.C.?
Well, I think on the tip of the tongue, you've got a lot of these economic issues that, whether it's paying at the pump or the price of milk or groceries, or everything's just become so much more expensive. And if you're on a fixed income or you're a hardworking, middle-class Missourian, this is tough. That is like it's not a silent tax increase. It is. I mean, they're paying 10, 18% more. If you want to buy a used car, you're paying 40% more than you were just a couple of years ago. And so I think those costs certainly have affected people and their purchasing power. And again, under President Trump, that administration, we saw record wage growth across all demographics. And that's what happens when you have economic policies that work for the American people. People have more opportunity. And it doesn't matter what zip code you're from or what race you are, what religion you are, people can succeed. And that American dream is now being blocked by this big government agenda. And I think, sort of more culturally, people want America back. They want their country back. They don't like the idea that their kids are being told to despise America in the classroom, or they're being taught these ridiculous things, in kindergarten, or that they're being forced to wear a mask all day long, or that the federal government's trying to dictate if you're going to decide to take a vaccine or not. They feel like this country's headed down a different path. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons why this administration is pushing so aggressively, and even on the border issues, is they know a reckoning is coming. In November, I think a reckoning is coming with the American people. The Democrats have gotten so extreme in their policies. It's just unrecognizable to whatever that party looked like 30, 40 years ago. It doesn't look the same. And Republicans, I think, conservatives, are hopefully providing an alternative to that, where we have more opportunity, a freedom agenda, a liberty agenda, so that families can pursue the American dream. And so anyway, that's what you hear a lot of frustration from what's happening from Washington D.C. and they really want people who are going to fight back, fighters that go to D.C. to really save America.
Yeah, and I think that's what they liked about Donald Trump as well.
Uh-huh.
And he every day, he was in the fight and he was battling against these folks that want to implement this agenda. I think one of the things that I'm sure you hear a lot about is the southern border and how it's broken, and now the Biden administration wants to roll back the Title 42 regulations, and I know that you have filed a lawsuit together with several other states. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that and kind of where it currently is postured and how we should expect it to progress?
Yeah, so I think we've seen since Biden took office and again rolled back the successful border security measures that President Trump had in place. We've seen waves and waves of illegal immigration. What we're about to see, if he's successful in pulling back Title 42, is a tsunami of illegal immigration. Many estimates put the number of expulsions, or the percentage of expulsions right now at the border, at over 50% because of Title 42, which is essentially, hey, because of some of the risks of people coming over, we don't know where they're from, we can send you back. And so if you assume, well, we don't assume, we know 8,000 people a day are coming across illegally that we know of. That number is going to double. That's 500,000 a week. And by the way, if you extrapolate the number that we've seen already with what we could see over a 4-year period, that could be 30 million people here illegally in Biden's, that 4 years. That's like the state of Texas. That's like 5 Missouris, okay, of people who've come here illegally. I mean, this is nuts. So anyway, we filed a lawsuit on Title 42. That's one piece of it. We've also, with Texas, so we joined with Arizona and Louisiana on that lawsuit. Other states have joined. We've filed the motion for a preliminary injunction late last week, so that's going to be moving forward. Missouri and Texas filed the Remain in Mexico lawsuit, which was another successful Trump-era measure, which basically said if you're seeking asylum, even though 9 out of 10 of those are bogus, Mexico is going to be the waiting room. Why is that important? It's because the cartels, who, by the way, are running the show right now, as you and I saw at the border just a couple months ago, it's an incentive. If they can bring the people across the border and then they're released into the interior of the United States waiting for the asylum hearing, that's a big incentive for them to bring more and more people here. That's what we've seen. So what President Trump had, which we was fighting to get reinstated, is Mexico's the waiting room while you're waiting for your hearing. Missouri and Texas have also filed a third lawsuit, which is to finish the border wall. Congress has appropriated millions of dollars to do it. Biden refused to spend it on that. In fact, he's paying contractors to not do the work while the materials lay on the ground. It's nuts. So I think you take those 3 things in the aggregate, that's a really effective policy preference that President Trump had that was working. Biden's pulled it all away, or trying to pull it all away. And then we've got what we've got, which is, more crime, more human trafficking, more fentanyl that's coming across the border. It's the leading cause of death now for Americans 18 to 45. It's affecting communities all across the country. I've been saying for months that every state's a border state, which is why Missouri is so involved in this, because that kind of illegal activity makes its way to Des Moines and St. Louis and Keokuk and Kirksville. And so we all got to fight back on this together.
No, that's so right. I think it's really, extraordinary, your leadership and your willingness to step up and to push back, because, having served in the Trump administration, all those policies you mentioned, we considered how can we get the border under control, because it was a complete mess when we took over, and, we came up with these whether it was the public charge doctrine, whether it was Remain in Mexico, all these policies that we finally got this thing under control, that we were giving the tools to the border protection folks that they needed to administer. And then obviously with the pandemic, Title 42 was enabled and was allowed them to quickly remove people, encounter at the border and send them back. And, and it's just they undid every single one of these policies to the detriment. I mean, obviously you could have predicted this as easily as any law of physics that you would have an explosion of illegal immigration. So thank you for doing that. As I was preparing for today, I think you did something extraordinary as Attorney General that I just want to say thank you, and I want to understand a little bit more, but it's this whole idea of this, the sexual assault kit, backlog, you cleared it out. You had over 3,000, I think it is, kits that were ultimately tested. So just tell us just a little bit about that, because I thought that was a smart plan and leadership by you as Attorney General.
Yeah, look, and your leadership as Attorney General, one of the most important jobs we have as AGs, whether it's a state or, clearly at the federal level too, is fighting for victims. And for those, sexual assault victims who've had the courage to come forward, we wanted to honor that courage by making sure a sexual assault kit didn't sit on a shelf, in some cases for decades, going untested. So the first thing we did was we went around and did an inventory and found thousands and thousands and thousands of these kits on shelves. And Missouri is not alone. This is true everywhere. Yeah. But it was something, as a husband and as a father, of 2 daughters, this is just something that I think is very important. And so, we're clearing that backlog. We essentially created that inventory. Created a tracking system, had legislation to make sure this never happens again, to have a central repository. We actually use private labs for the testing, so we didn't inundate the current kits that are being tested by the Missouri State Highway Patrol. That was, well thought out, so that we made sure that even the current cases are being tested at the same time. And then ultimately send them to the lab and come back, and we've gotten a number of CODIS hits already. We've referred those to local law enforcement. We're working with those local law enforcement agencies and prosecutors to bring people to justice. So our Safe Kit initiative is something that I'm very proud of, and I think is a model for other states to look to make sure that they have some solutions to this problem too.
Yeah, and it's so important to those victims of those crimes deserve justice, and so when you can deliver that kind of justice and mm-hmm. identify the perpetrator and prosecute them and support the local law enforcement and obviously this important mission, I think I thought that was extraordinary as I was preparing for it. And so,
well, thanks for bringing that up, because it's one of those things that we're proud of, and we do some press conferences to mark the progress, but sometimes it doesn't get talked a lot about. So I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah. Now, a couple other topics that I just wanted to talk about is, I think a lot of folks that are watching this and listening to this show this week are concerned about our nation's schools, and especially what's being taught. It seems like every topic, whether it's math or social studies, is bringing in the woke agenda, the groups that are trying to indoctrinate our children into all sorts of nonsense. And I think a lot of people were focused on the whole Florida bill that sort of said you can't teach essentially sex education to third graders, and everybody lost their minds. When I say everybody, I mean everybody on the left, because most of us were like, why were they doing that in the first place?
Right. Yeah.
But I know that you've had an initiative addressing some of this school curriculum craziness, and I just wanted to give you a chance to explain to our listeners and viewers how you've approached that and what you've found.
Yeah, I mean, this is really an effort just to get back to the basics, right? Let's teach our kids, reading, writing, math, science, as opposed to this woke indoctrination that has made its way into school districts across Missouri and across the country that you might not expect. Our first entry into this, really, or one of the first, was in Springfield, Missouri, in Southwest Missouri. A whistleblower came forward with some of these training materials for staff and for teachers and administrators that included things like the oppression matrix and the pyramid of white supremacy. That included, by the way, that if you believed in colorblindness, that people should be judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That was covert white supremacy. So was "Make America Great Again," by the way. The phrase was, this stuff is crazy. And by the way, the idea that this is just a graduate level course, I think the left has finally abandoned that lie.
Right.
And it's made its way into the classroom, no doubt. But if you're training everybody who works in a school to have that mindset, to divide people by oppressor and oppressed, that is very divisive. And if you're a hammer, everything's a nail, right? And I think that is the agenda here, is to really divide and to untether this country from our, what we believe in, which is that everybody's born with certain rights and everybody ought to be able to pursue happiness, and that no matter your race or your religion, you should have the opportunity to succeed. And if you can create this divisiveness That's the goal, and they're making their way across Missouri and across the country with this ideology. And by the way, when parents during the lockdowns were figuring, so anyway, we sued Springfield Public School District to basically say they were denying our records request. So we're starting to get a bunch of different records now from across the state as we've opened up this portal. Things called the gender unicorn and the genderbread person. Like instead of the gingerbread. I mean, this stuff is crazy, and it's meant for young kids.
Right.
And so, anyway, CRT 1619 project. It's in the classroom, and they can't deny it anymore. So we're really trying to hold folks accountable. And this was on top of us suing a lot of school districts, 45 of them. I think I was the only AG that sued almost 50 school districts in their state for the mask mandates because they don't work. They're not about science or data. It's about power and control. So we've been very aggressive. And by the way, when parents figured this stuff out when their kids were home, guess what they did? They started showing up to school board meetings. And then what happened? The National School Board Association went to the Attorney General's office and then sought to investigate these parents as domestic terrorists under the Patriot Act. And so you don't think it matters what administration's in charge? You did a great job as Attorney General. Merrick Garland, on the other hand, is weaponizing the FBI to investigate parents because they care enough about their kids' education to show up. This is crazy. So we're suing we're suing the federal government for release of those documents too. We want to know who was involved. We're suing the Missouri School Board Association to figure out what they knew, when they knew it. Right. We're not going away on this because I think parents deserve answers. They deserve transparency when it comes to curriculum, and we just got to put a stop to this stuff.
Yeah, and I have my two thoughts on that. Is one is parents' engagement is needed now more than ever in their children's education because of these exact sort of insidious indoctrination that's going on in our schools, and it's a shame because it just shouldn't be like this. And this Marxist, critical theory approach is done for one thing, and that is to your point, to divide us upon sort of our external indicators instead of our internal character and the type of people we are. Despite sort of all this nonsense that the left keeps trying to pile on. The mask mandate, for me, I went to Easter Sunday church service, and they had a sign that essentially said, you can wear a mask or not wear a mask, but just don't bother anybody about whether they're wearing a mask or not. And I just thought to myself, not only is that the right approach, if somebody wants to wear a mask, great, wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask. And, wear one that actually works, not that's like, and the other thing, Eric, that's so frustrating for me is like, I see advertisements and I see people like with paper straws and biodegradable straws, and I just think, how many masks do I see laying on the street every day, just discarded and garbage? I mean, we've created more pollution with these masks that don't work, that provide no real benefit for anybody wearing them. It's so again, these people are reflexively believing this stuff. And it's sad that there's nobody of, kind of honesty and goodwill at the federal government that can just tell the truth and say that, this is all nonsense.
Well, and they're never going to let it go. They really aren't. I mean, you're already hearing Fauci, by the way, admitted that lockdowns were to force people to get vaccinated. Think about that. The government was restricting your movement and access, and by the way, livelihoods, because they had a belief that you should be forced to get a vaccine or not. I mean, this COVID authoritarianism deserves to be on the ash heap of history, which is one of the reasons why I've been so aggressive about this. I just think it's a real threat to who we are as a people. We've been the freest country in the history of the world. People can make these decisions themselves, not government. And to your point, look, if you want to get quadruple vaxxed and put 10 masks on your face and jog around a park outside all day long, knock yourself out. This is America. But don't try to have the government compel everybody to do this stuff because it's ineffective and it's one big virtue signal. Let's just be honest about it. And people have had enough of it.
Yeah, I agree. So as the top law enforcement officer in Missouri, I know that you feel strongly about your support of law enforcement, that you are constantly a defender and supporter of the men and women of law enforcement. I just wanted to give you a minute to sort of talk about kind of how strong that relationship you have with them is, and just how kind of you look for opportunities to support them in their mission.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've done as Attorney General is we started something called the Back the Blue Award, where we'll go around the state and honor the men and women of law enforcement who've done big things like, literally save people, going above and beyond the call of duty, save people's lives and, endanger their own lives in the process. And little things like, sponsoring a lemonade stand that these neighborhood kids were having for a great cause. I mean, there's so many great things that these law enforcement officers do every day. We wanted to make sure we recognize it. And then also just standing up to this kind of defund the police movement, which you mentioned earlier. St. Louis and Kansas City, their mayors are actively trying to defund police departments. And so we've been very aggressive in pushing back. We've filed briefs and cases to stop that. And in St. Louis, you've got a mayor that's trying to take money out of their budget. And then also we actually had, this is kind of a weird vignette, but we had a case where the city of St. Louis owed the state money, $5 million. And I didn't do a press conference on this. I didn't do anything. I wrote quietly to the mayor and said, look, if you use the $5 million to hire more police officers, because you're 200 short now anyway, and they're going to see a rash of early, keep the money for that purpose. She held a press conference and rejected it and wanted it used for some kind of pet project that was just nuts. And so that's what we're dealing with. You have people who respect what they do, want to support them, and you have people who are trying to tear them down. And I think it's important for people in these positions to make sure that they tell the men and women of law enforcement and the public how much they're appreciated.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic, and I share your support and unwavering defense of law enforcement and the important mission they have. In the limited time that we have left, you're running for the United States Senate in Missouri. Tell me a little bit about that campaign, and then also I want you to make sure to mention where people can learn more about you, your campaign, and all the good work you're doing.
Yeah, look, this is a very important race. It's a 50-50 Senate right now, and so Missouri's on that map, and there's just no scenario where we take control of the Senate without winning Missouri. And I think we're in the best position to do it. Having won statewide a couple times, people know that I'm a conservative fighter who's not going to back down and willing to. When President Trump was in office, as you know, there was no more ardent defender of his policies that brought us that unprecedented economic success, energy independence, secure border. And then now with Biden in office, we're taking a blowtorch to this radical agenda. And I think that's what people want right now. I think that's indicative of the support we've gotten. We're ahead in the polls. Our fundraising numbers are great. All those sort of things that allow you to get your message out, we're doing. And just, want to help save America. I think you need reinforcements in Washington right now, and I think we're in a good spot. If people want to learn more about the campaign, they can go to Schmitt for Senate, SCHMITT for Senate.com, or I'm on the Twitter machine and the Facebooks and all that stuff too. So, but yeah, things are going well, and our primary is in August and the general's in November. It's all hands on deck because you got to hold Missouri, then you got seats like Arizona and Nevada and Georgia and Pennsylvania. And although I think it's going to be historically a good year, that's more reflected in the House in just pure numbers. These Senate races are always, a little bit more challenging. But I think we're in the best position to go do that, and I'm excited about it.
Good. Well, I agree with you. And one thing I want to underline and highlight that you just said is in the Trump administration, and I was there, I served in it, there was no better warrior for protecting and defending and supporting our agenda than Eric Schmitt, the Attorney General in Missouri. I could always rely on you to be a partner, and you're a great public servant. So I thank you for being with us today on Liberty and Justice. All of my listeners and followers can always see us every Friday. We premiere on CPAC Now, and then any podcast channel or on Rumble, or of course, everything I'm doing is on Whitaker.tv. Eric, great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for your service, first of all, Matt, and thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you, my friend.